You know, the story of Jesus in Capernaum, the way history and the Gospels seem to move closer and closer together, and suddenly at the last moment seem to pull apart. Well, you can repeat that dozens of times with other Gospel stories. It's almost deliberate. It's almost as if the writers of the Gospels refuse to connect history and their faith together, as if they wouldn't degrade their faith in the Lord with mere historical fact. Actually, even mere historical fact requires some degree of faith. Take Alexander the Great, for example. There's a well-known historical figure for you. Well, there's 3 or 4 semi-fabulous, sort of part legendary biographies of him. That's all, really. But what there is, what the man has left, is his effect. His armies built Greek temples practically on the borders of India where he'd taken them to. His policies had reorganised all the ancient world. That's why, at the end of the day, we know that he lived, that he was a real man. And that, too, I suggest, is why we can say that Jesus was a real man and lived. It's the effect of him that counts. The fact that shortly after his death, there was churches everywhere, that Gospels were being written. That's how we know that there must have been some energy at the centre of all that. But Jesus, unlike Alexander, was a humble man. Alexander's dad was a king, he was a king. There were coins, there were court things. Everything to do with Alexander was on a higher level. Jesus, however, the humble man, lived in a little fishing village. We don't know the names of anybody who lived in Capernaum. It would be unreasonable to find written documentation of Jesus or Peter the fisherman. We shouldn't expect to find it. Ordinary lives of humble people. What we can say is from those houses, from that village, from the Gospels themselves, came such an effect that we can say that Jesus was a real historical figure. If we say that Jesus really lived, then at last we can begin to fit him into the history of his own times. And you do it like this. There are about 360 stories in the Gospels. Let's see how they fit into real historical first-century Palestine. Ancient Palestine, where the Jews were governed by the Romans. What would have happened, for example, if a real guy had turned up in the Temple of Jerusalem in Jesus' time and had a punch-up with the money changers? What would people have thought about the idea of a God being your father? Our Father, which art in heaven, Jesus says. Would it have made him popular? Would it have got him arrested, or what? It's a great historical game fitting Jesus into history. It's been going on a long time, too. The trouble is that the Gospels tell us that the length of time from Jesus' baptism in the River Jordan to his crucifixion in Jerusalem, the span of his entire career on earth, was just 3 years. And that's a very small period of time in ancient history. There's not much to go on. I think at the end of the day, you can say now that historians have a little sort of set of rules that you can say about Jesus that are true historical facts about him. It's based on a lot of scrupulous research about the Roman Empire and the accuracy of the Gospels and how the words in the Gospels themselves deal with certain civil and civic facts. Now, historians themselves wouldn't claim, for example, the resurrection or the miracles, but what they claim is, when this man lived, that as a man preaching the things he did, walking on the earth and coming into contact with the civil, military authorities that he came in contact, that there is a likelihood that these things are true of the man. It's what you can call the historian's creed, if you like, and it's fairly short and fairly simple. It goes something like this. Jesus lived in Galilee. He preached, he healed, he had followers, he came to Jerusalem, he argued with the temple authorities, and he was crucified by the Romans. And that, they would tell you, is what you can know about this unknowable man. Christ, hanging here on his cross upon the rock of Calvary, has moved right out of earthly realities. He's moved from fact to faith. He hangs in the future, in the present, in the past. And all around the silent figure, men have made so many choices, seen him in so many different ways. And we only know of the man from the Gospels, and they were written generations after he'd been crucified and buried. So Jesus of Nazareth was enshrined in a book. The four Gospels told the world that he was Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. But who wrote these Gospels? Were they really written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? And when and where were they composed? One of the very oldest traditions of the Christian church tells us that St. Mark took water from this spring and that he used the water to mix the ink to write his gospel, and that he wrote his gospel here to the dictation of St. Peter the fisherman. This old cave is cut in the cliffs high above the site of ancient Antioch, right at the tip of modern Turkey. Church traditions say that this little grotto is actually the oldest church in the world. You know, in the time of Christ, along with Rome and Alexandria in Egypt, this city, Antioch, was the greatest city in the world. And what a city it was, what a reputation it had. This is where Antony brought Cleopatra for their sort of a honeymoon. Also had a very large Jewish population. After all, Palestine, Jerusalem, is not too far down the coast from here. So when the book of Acts says that when the first Christians in Jerusalem were persecuted, as Jews, it wouldn't be surprising that they upped their sticks and came here and joined the Jewish community. Church tradition again tells us that in Antioch, Christians were first called Christians. That is, not the followers of Jesus or some other thing. So you see, old Antioch has a very important place in early Christianity. That lovely story of St. Mark and his ink could well be true. The trouble with that is that there's an equally strong tradition that says that what St. Mark really did was went to Rome with St. Peter, and there it was that Peter dictated his gospel. And then, after Peter was martyred, the story says that Mark then travelled to Alexandria where he wrote the final draft of his gospel. So, for every single tradition, and strong tradition, there's an equally strong contradictory one about who wrote these gospels. Add all those contradictory traditions together, though, and what you soon see is Christianity spreading very quickly through the Roman Empire. Churches sprung up like mushrooms at Antioch, and cities like Smyrna in Asia Minor, Alexandria in Egypt, Corinth in Greece, and great Rome itself. The Gospels were made in this period. They may have been written in one country, edited in another, and copied out and published somewhere else. For Christianity had become completely international.